few weeks ago, I reviewed the 8Bitdo so-called Ultimate controller. I was pretty excited about it, and in fact I had it on pre-order since they announced the damn thing. But as it turned out, once I got it, tested it, reviewed it, I considered it somewhat less than Ultimate. I mean, it was fine, even good in many respects, but it just had a couple of flaws and compromises that it just meant I didn't like it enough for it to fold itself into my life as one of my go-to controllers. I kept using it after that review, hoping to get more used to it, but I just never did. In response to that review, though, a pretty large number of you commenters asked, begged, suggested, hoped, and suggested more strongly that I check out this. Hello again, I am Blunty, and this is the Gulikit KingKong2 Pro Controller, a name rather less elegant and snappy than 8Bitdo Ultimate, but that is in fact the only thing about this controller that I do like less than the 8Bitdo effort. Well, almost. But the main reason this was such a strong ask from you guys on that 8Bitdo review is, like the 8Bitdo, it too uses Hall effect sensors to absolutely eliminate the very concept, the very thought, the abstract suggestion of stick drift, and a significant portion of ordinary wear and tear on the thumbsticks to go with it. So let's break it down. Now, since this review is pretty much in direct response to the 8Bitdo Ultimate experience, before we dive into the tech specs as we normally would in a review at this point, let's quickly talk about what is in fact better here, compared to the Ultimate. As it seems, quite a lot of people do ask which is the better option of these two third-party controllers for Switch and PC games. They seem to be the leading two choices out there. And let's start with ergonomics and comfort. There were two core issues for me with the 8Bitdo. The first was the rather steep slope of the grip lobes, which I found to be awkward, mildly uncomfortable at best, and forced my grip into a position which led to significantly faster fatigue building up on my wrists. But as you can see, the Gulikit has a much more standard angle on the grip lobes. It is in fact slightly broader than Nintendo's own Pro Controller, and basically identical to a standard Xbox controller, which as far as my preferences go is basically ideal. Strong win for Gulikit there. Next, the positioning of the function face buttons. At first glance, it might seem similar, with three horizontally aligned buttons through the middle there, but while on the 8Bitdo, these are the plus, minus, and the star button, which in Switch mode is the screenshot and clip button, my big problem here was the fact that I just kept hitting the thumbstick whenever I reached for the plus button. It was getting in the way because it was dumbly placed. And the plus button is a button that is relatively frequently used in many games for interface and quick menu purposes and the like, so that's a pretty stupid design decision. And the screenshot and clip button was simply not in a convenient place to quickly and easily hit mid-game, as I often do, especially when it's in the middle of two other buttons. It makes it sort of hard to stab at blindly, which is what you want to do if you're just trying to take a quick clip or a screenshot in the middle of something you're already doing in the game. Stupid design decision. And sure, these might seem like small issues to you, but they never stopped annoying me. To this day, they still have not stopped annoying me, as you may be able to pick up in my tone. Gulikit have been much smarter about this. The home and screenshot buttons are more or less in identical spots to the standard Switch Pro controller alignment, and while the plus and minus buttons are both higher and slightly more inward, they're still in spots that I expect them to be in, and in places that are easy to blind reach for. The home button is still in a position that makes me nudge the thumbstick, but the difference is that will never actually matter because it's not a game input and it never will be, so it doesn't matter if I nudge the thumbstick when I reach for that button. The final physical issue with the 8Bitdo was the reasonably mushy triggers. They had a pretty bad feel to them, really, particularly in my favorite Switch game, Monster Hunter Rise, as of course the Switch itself has short-throw digital triggers, which feel very responsive and crisp in game. So for a controller designed primarily to be for the Switch, it felt like a pretty dumb decision to me to make these analog triggers so long and squishy. Both the 8Bitdo and the Gulikit are multi-platform controllers though, and as the Switch is, in fact, the only console that doesn't use analog triggers in its control scheme, both of these third-party controllers have analog triggers to maintain full functionality with PC, etc. So, while using it on the Switch, which again is the primary device it's built for, as clearly evidenced by the face button layout and system button complement, the analog triggers are not standard or ideal, and certainly not my preference. The Gulikit ones are, however, noticeably better. To start, they have a noticeably shorter throw, something that feels quite close to an Xbox controller. Except, it's also noticeably smoother than that. And I'll come back to that little tidbit momentarily. Keep it in your mind. And all this makes the Gulikit feel a lot more responsive in Switch games despite them still being analog. I do not, however, like the silver painted plastic look. This has always felt kind of just cheap and nasty to me, but that is just aesthetics. I can get past it easy enough, but I do wish they hadn't gone that way. You can also adjust the trigger sensitivity to your personal preference, as indeed you can also do this with the thumbsticks, in fact. But the only place I consider the 8Bitdo superior to the Gulikit is the really very nice dock that comes with the 8Bitdo Ultimate, while the Gulikit settles for a standard USB 3 charging point on the top there. Not a huge deal, but I do really like the 8Bitdo's dock. It's one of the best docks out there regardless, in fact. But the final main difference is that while the 8Bitdo uses a USB dongle for connection to anything compatible that isn't Nintendo Switch, the Gulikit uses standard Bluetooth, like regular controllers, meaning it can seamlessly move from Switch to PC or indeed PC controller compatible devices because the Gulikit supports both X input and even the older D input and even an Android specific mode. And you can quickly switch between all these modes with a little button hold. The mode is even glanceable with a little array of unobtrusive LEDs on the top of the controller, blissfully out of sight while in use. It can also be used in wired mode if you prefer that, or indeed need to because of battery or whatever, which is where we start stepping away from the direct 8Bitdo comparisons and start talking more generally. The battery life. It's listed as 25 hours, and if you've seen my recent hit piece on Sony's laughably half-assed, sloppy, stupid, idiotic so-called Premium Pro controller they're trying to sell people for an horrific price, you'll know that 25 hours is basically right in the sweet spot where I consider it pretty much a thing you never need to worry about. In my real-world testing, that number seems pretty accurate. I've drained this controller down twice from a full charge while testing it over the last week and a half, and I'm on my third full charge as I produce this review. And this kind of battery life is comfortably in excess of my even sometimes considerably long play sessions. So no complaints there. The Gulikit does have 6-axis motion sensing, something only a few third-party Switch controllers have, and it works, well, exactly as you'd expect it to. Naturally, it also has a perfectly serviceable rumble feature. But one thing that this does that no other third-party controller for Switch, at least the ones that I know about, does, it has fully functional amiibo scanning support. Not entirely sure how, though, because my understanding of the situation is, and you know, the reason nobody else has it, is because Nintendo don't license out their patent on this or whatnot. So it's either some sort of weird workaround that they've figured out, or Gulikit are just kind of being, how shall we put it, being a bit Chinese about the whole thing. You know, that Chinese thing where they don't respect copyrights, patents, trademarks, and whatnot. So I have no idea if Nintendo will ever send their lawyers after Gulikit or not, but at least for now, yeah, it has 100% fully functional amiibo NFC scanning. Probably not a huge priority for most people, but it's at least interesting, if not handy. Personally speaking, I've only ever used amiibo support frequently in 2 games, Breath of the Wild, and it will probably be the same situation for its sequel coming up this year, and Monster Hunter Rise. So let's talk Hall effect again. I figure by now most of you are becoming more familiar with the tech, but short version is, instead of using a mechanical, physical, sliding mechanism to detect stick drift and direction, Hall effect uses magnetic fields and a contactless arrangement, meaning massively reduced wear and tear, a significant boost in long-term accuracy, and making the kind of stick drift that has plagued both Nintendo and Sony this generation, and to a lesser extent Xbox, basically irrelevant. And it's not new technology. In fact, as people love to point out in reviews like this about controllers that feature Hall effect sensors, Sega used Hall effect sticks in the Dreamcast controller way back in the damn 90s. And why this hasn't become industry standard is a constant source of frustration for people like me who understand the massive benefits and zero drawbacks. Except for perhaps a few cents on manufacturing costs, which is probably why they don't do it. Cheap bastards. Interesting, though, for as often as that Dreamcast factoid likes to get tossed about by people, a lot of them don't seem to also realize the Dreamcast controller also used Hall effect sensors in the triggers as well. And guess what? Gulikit are doing that as well. Something no other controller I'm at least aware of is doing, not even the ones with Hall effect sensors in the sticks. Remember a couple of minutes ago when I said that the triggers had about the same mobility and throw as an Xbox controller, but with a noticeably smoother feel? Well, now you know why. They feel noticeably smoother because they're Hall effect. One of the other, admittedly very minor issues I had with the 8BitDo's own Hall effect thumbsticks was I felt that the spring in them was slightly too stiff, which made making extremely subtle and slow movements a bit fiddly and awkward, overcoming the initial spring resistance and all. It tended to overcorrect. Once more, the Gulikit is better in that regard, with a resistance to the sticks that feels damn near identical to Nintendo's own Pro Controller, which itself is ever so slightly more compliant than Xbox. In the real world, this makes very fine movements feel nice and responsive, and very small adjustments feel sharp and accurate. Precise would be the word. What I'm not a huge fan of, though, is the shoulder buttons. For some reason, Gulikit have used a noticeably audible clicky button mechanism. While the 8BitDo and the Switch Pro controllers both have quietly dampened but still tactile clicks, the Gulikit has a rather unpleasant sounding clack to my ears. Not a deal breaker, not even close, but I do wish it wasn't so because I do not like the way it sounds. Which brings us to the face buttons. They're actually really great. They're a bit sharper feeling than the Switch Pro controller. They feel about as positive as an Xbox controller, except the throw distance is shallower, which in turn makes them feel really snappy and responsive. And they don't even move around as much as the Xbox. You know when you give the buttons a wiggle on the Xbox, they sort of slide around horizontally a bit? Yeah, these ones are more securely in place. Which is neither here nor there, but it makes it feel just a little bit more premium. You know what I mean? Frankly, I think they might be my very favorite feeling face buttons on any controller yet. And if your main personal preference is indeed not the Switch, they do actually sell a set of replacement face buttons, which switch out not unlike keyboard keycaps do, so you can have your standard Xbox style layout if you want. The D-pad is pretty good too. I'd put it closest to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, but sitting slightly more shallow. Nothing heroically outstanding here, but, zero complaints. The controller has a couple of other bells and whistles, like being able to set it up with absolutely zero dead zone on the sticks at all for crazy responsive, but significantly fiddly feel. You can also kind of pre-record a series of inputs, macro style, and have the controller play it back at will for you. And it has the ability to recalibrate the gyro sensor at will. And all of this is right from the controller itself. No software needed, but it also means don't lose your manual, maybe bookmark the online manual, because you will never remember the series of key inputs required to trigger these various features, which is one of the reasons I like software a little bit better, because it makes it more sensible and easy. But on the same page, not having to fiddle with software makes it more convenient as well. So 6 one, half dozen the other. I really like the ergonomics and feel very much in general. The faceplate has a smooth, very fine texture to it, once more, pretty damn close to an Xbox controller. There's a slightly coarser texture on the back of the grips, not quite as coarse as an Xbox controller, but nonetheless it feels really nice, very comfortable, just the right amount of grip, I like it. The thumbsticks have a comfortable and shallow convex to them, my personal preference, and the ports they sit in actually have a small steel ring around the outside, which, nice touch. It makes the extreme edges when rolling through the extreme range feel very smooth indeed, and of course will also stand up to a little more wear and tear than the ordinary hole of plastic might. The size, the balance, the weight all sit in a really nice sweet spot. And like I said near the opening, its general ergonomics are damn close to a standard Xbox controller, which means I can have extremely long play sessions with it and not expect significant fatigue to set in for a very long time indeed. And indeed, my longest continuous play session with this controller so far has been a little over 8 hours of monster hunting, during which it remained perfectly comfortable the entire time. Only time will tell what the Gulikit's life will be like, but it does at least feel solidly constructed. It gives the impression of being robust and reliable, so, fairly good hopes on that score. This is the first controller from this brand that I've ever held in my hands, so I have no prior experience on which to measure, any hopes of long-term reliability. But, like I said, first impressions, feels pretty good. But all in all, this has now become my personal favorite third-party controller, beating out the Power A Fusion Pro Wireless. And indeed, the Gulikit KingKong2 Pro has become my go-to day-to-day controller on my Nintendo Switch and on my PC as well. This is now my go-to, my normal, my prime, my first choice controller for both those systems going forward. So there you go. Hopefully I've answered all the questions you had about this controller. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. Thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. So thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and we'll catch you next time.